So now we're on to banking. This chapter is a little shorter. The goal we're trying to do here is we're trying to kind of define the checking account and correctly prepare deposit slips and write checks. I know this is more like I'm kind of looking at it more from a personal finance perspective. But if you're going to go into accounting, if you're going to go into management of a business, it's important to know how to know your numbers and how to keep track of things. Because if you watch a lot of these business shows, one of the most critical errors that people make is that they don't keep track. And when they need to keep track of inventory, keep track of costs, they don't. And then they end up wondering why they're $100,000 in debt and closing the doors. So the first part is just to talk about checks, how to write checks. I don't know how often you write checks anymore, but I don't anymore because I have a mortgage, but I used to write rent checks every month. My landlords preferred to use online systems, but I preferred the check because then I handed it to them in person, and then I had a conversation with them to make sure everything was okay. But now I'm antisocial, and also it's like some weird mortgage clearinghouse that owns my mortgage, so can't really write them a check. I guess I could, but it's easier just to do it online. Anyways, and then the second part is kind of the reconciliation process. We're moving from a more analog to a digital, and generating statements, completing the check register is all useful information. So when it comes to checks and drafts, we have this kind of this is drawer, not drawer. The drawer is the person who writes a check. So basically, a check is just something that's written. I think we know what checks are, but remember that there's three parties here, not two. Most of us think of like a contract or a transaction between two parties, where we think, okay, like I'm gonna give you money, you're gonna get money, and that's it. But because we're using an intermediary here as in a bank, we have to acknowledge this part right here, the drawee part. The drawer is you if you're writing the check. The payee is whoever you're paying. But if your money is in a bank account to which there is a reason why you're writing a check in the first place instead of giving them cash or whatever, you have to assign the bank that's paying it, which is what the check is for. The check is basically a financial document that is administered by the drawee to basically be an approved form of transaction through their intermediate service between the drawer and the payee. And before I move on, I would be remiss to not tell you the story about drawer and why I wanted to say drawer and not drawer. When I was in school, like elementary school, I got my first AOL account. So not AIM, AOL, not even AIM. Well, I had AIM, but this is pre-AIM. This is when like instant messages were through AOL. So I don't know how many of you have used AOL or not, America Online, but my mom set me up with an account so I could play like bingo online. And so I had an account. Now, when you wouldn't be able to tell based on my handwriting and my drawings here, but when I was, 6 or 7 to 8 years old, I liked to draw. And I used to like to draw things. I did fine art in 9th grade, but I didn't do very well. So naturally, I wanted my username to be what my hobby was, which is to draw. So my username was Drawer Boy. The problem with that is that if you don't realize that this is drawer, it looks like drawer. So a lot of people probably thought my username meant I was a boy who was living inside of a closet drawer or something like that, or a clothes drawer. So always know that even though these look the same, they have completely different meanings. I meant it that I like to draw. The world saw it as I was just like an elf or something living on like a clothes drawer, and then I changed it not too long after I realized that. Actually, I don't even think I realized it until like a long time afterwards, but I was a kid. Give me a break. So here's an example of a deposit slip. I haven't used one of these in a while, but the main things that you need to look at is that checks typically have numbers attached to them. So each institution has their own numbering system, their own accounting purposes. So maybe your checks are personal checks and they start at 0 and 1 because they're your checks, and you might not really care about the number, but if you care about the number, you can create your own ordering system. If you're running payroll for an institution like MCC or a grocery store, you probably have your own numbering system. And so what these numbers represent is the check number that's representative by the checks that are being used by that specific institution for their own personal accounting purposes, especially for the reconciliation process. It can be helpful. The date is the deposit ticket is usually specific to the institution which you're depositing to or depositing from. What these numbers represent are, one is a routing number and one is an account number. Does anyone know which one is the routing number and which one is the account number? Typically, your routing number has 8 or 9 digits. So if I were to guess, I would say that this is the routing number. And this is the account number. Again, account numbers so a routing number is basically, the account number is what account that you possess that it goes to. The routing number tells you which bank it goes to. And then you have the values, and then you just add them together, put them at the bottom, and then make sure your numbers are right. I have made the mistake before where I've signed the checks, put the check numbers down, and then oopsies, I did my math wrong, and then the teller's like, I have to fix this. Start over. Now, what does a check itself look like? So this is when you deposit the checks. This is the actual check itself. Again, here's the check number. So this bank, on behalf of Gracie's Natural Superstore, has their 633rd check. I'm trying to see which one's the routing number. I guess that was the account number. And then I'm guessing this is the routing number. It's 9 digits between the A's. So this was the routing number. Sorry about that. Routing number is usually listed first, so I was confused, and I was like, this is only 8 numbers. So yeah, the routing number is here. Account number is here. So it depends on, if it's a personal check, usually the check number is only up here in the right corner, but sometimes the check number is written in like 5 different places for like security purposes. So in the chat, drop and say, when was the last time you wrote a check? I totally agree with you, Kyle. That's why I was about to ask, when's the last time everyone wrote a check? Never. Last week. Never wrote one. I think the last time I wrote a check was I want to say February, maybe January. It was January or February. I had someone come out and I had ice on my roof and I was getting some water under the shingles. And so that was the last time I wrote a check. Before that, the last time I used a check was when I closed on my house, except I used a certified check. So I didn't even write it. The bank like printed it out for me. So like I used to write a monthly when I was renting in Wyoming and everywhere else I rented, except in Oregon. I paid that online. But yeah, I haven't used them in a long time. I don't even, if I had to find a check right now, I don't even know if I could find one. But anyways, even though this is antiquated in some way, lots of people still get paid via checks like this, or at least get pay stubs that look like this. Or MCC has done some reimbursements for me and I've gotten checks in the mail from them to deposit. But yeah, this is becoming more antiquated by the day. So maybe it's a good thing that we're covering this in case you have to use it, or maybe it's pointless because you may never have to use it. But we'll go for it anyway. Oh, this is usually the like address and information of the person writing the check. I don't even think, actually, I might have a checkbook in my backpack here. Give me a second. Nope, I took them out. Guess I'm screwed if I need to write a check in a pinch, but I don't think that's going to happen. They used to be in my backpack, but I don't even think my name, I think my name's here, but I think my address is here. So personal checks may vary. Depends on what you put in there. So date is important. Pay to the order of is who you're writing it to. You write the amount of the check here in the form of dollars and cents in a numerical value. This is a old looking check. This XX, I think, is supposed to be the decimal value. And then you have to write it out in words. It's like very legalese where you have to write the number and then the words, and then actually the word part is the part that's binding. So you could write like 10 million here. $10 million. And 6,000 is the binding part. Although they probably avoid the check just because there's not matching numbers here. But it's the actual words that you write out that are like the binding part, not necessarily the number. I think this is for like the computer to read, and this is for the actual like legal form. And then memos are optional. I always put memos in, even though they don't come up. But like when the bank sends me the printout or like the scan of the actual check being deposited, it allows for me to know why it was being cashed. And then this is the signature line. This is not what I would see as a signature. I mean, some people do sign and print, but I would expect it to be more like Molly Kate as your signature there. That typed out part kind of makes it seem like it's another memo or something like that. But so Molly Kate is basically the person assigned on behalf of Gracie's Natural Superstore to sign for the checks. The memo is saying that $6,000 was transferred for office equipment. You have to write the word out and then XX as in the cents. Since there's no cents, it's 0 over $100. So like if you haven't like learned how to write these words out in a long time, like sometimes you have to think about it for a little bit. Like, do you put in like dashes or whatever? And so 647, 600 and, or 647, you can't put an and, it has to be 647 and the cents. So yeah, so the important things are date, who it's going to, number matches up with the words, memo is optional but recommended, signature of the person, this is the routing number, this is the account number, but this stuff should already be on the check. And long story short, I'm not testing you on how to write a check. It's not on the homework, it's not on the test. So there's different types of endorsements. So this is the part where you're signing the check. Like, so when you get a check, you have to sign the back of it to deposit it. And so these are the ways in which you can endorse the check on the back. Most people just sign it. So from a company's perspective, you just write the account number and the store. The trick or the risk about this is that somebody else could presumably sign it, endorse it, and cash on their behalf. It's a little tricky, and then there's fraud claims. They probably get caught, but it's less likely to, or it's more likely or possible, even though it's unlikely, but it's more possible that if someone like just blew away in the wind, someone picked it up and signed it, that they could presumably get the $6,000. The full endorsement is basically saying that you're paying to the order of the specific entity who is in charge of the account of the business. So only the person or the company is named, which means that they can transfer it to somebody else. So like, let's say that the company needs to pay $6,000, and so they could presumably transfer this to some other party, but they'd have to authorize the passing of it, which seems like a waste of time. You could just deposit and then write them a check. But I guess to skip the middleman, you could just give. I wouldn't do that. And then restricted is what I learned when I was in high school in personal finance. If you're depositing a check and you're not withdrawing any of the amount, just write for deposit only. And it basically means that the check is going into the bank, being deposited, and that's the only way it can be used. Obviously, after it's deposited and clears, then you can withdraw as much as you want. But this ensures that it goes to the right account, and then afterwards, it's kind of up to the person who's in charge of the account to do what they want with it. With these other ones, you could presumably withdraw some of it or have further endorsements, and there's a security risk there. But again, if you're not really writing checks, none of this matters. In case you have been living under a rock, the banking industry is going more digital. We're using apps. In fact, I use my smartphone app every single day. Sometimes I use it on a laptop. I use the website, but most of the time I use my apps for doing any sort of like transfers. So I want to transfer money from my checking to my savings, savings to my checking, checking to another savings, blah, blah, blah. I use mobile banking. So let's talk about reconciliation, because that's something that I will assess you on, and I think is important even if you don't use regular checks, because you might use electronic checks. Now, has anyone written an electronic check recently? You might not fill it out the way you would, but you have, but like if you do like auto pay for like cell phone companies, they might give you a discount if you do auto pay, or your like utility bill might give you a discount for auto pay. They may do an electronic check. So an electronic check, basically what you do is you put in your account number, your routing number, and the amount, and that's it. So basically this part is the part that matters really for the check. It's this means it's authorized. This is the amount. This is the bank. This is the account within the bank. And so if you do an electronic check, you may have some of these reconciliation issues, even if you don't write physical checks. And bank statements are not the same as checkbooks. So like when you reconcile things in a checkbook, I don't know if any of your like parents did this. My parents did this all the time. My grandparents did this all the time, where basically they write a check, rip it out, and then in the back, there was this thing called a ledger. And in the ledger, you'd write in the check and you would put the number in, and then you would recalculate your real-time balance. You would be like, oh, well, at the beginning of the month, I had $1,196, or this check, and I don't have a mobile app in 1997 to go check it without going to the bank and actually asking for a statement. So I just keep track on my own so I don't overdraft. So that's what a checkbook does, or a ledger does. And that's what the reconciliation process is derived from, is you need to have a real-time understanding of how much money you generally have. And one of the benefits of having mobile and electronic banking is that we have a better grasp of just logging in and having a real-time balance. The problem is if we have those floating electronic checks or whatever out there, or auto pay or something like that, the amount of money you actually have might be less than what it says in your account. And then if you mistakenly assume that you have that money and spend that money, and then the check comes, and then you get an overdraft fee, and then you pay that plus that, and then you're behind the 8 ball. So reconciliation is really just all about timing. Just to be clear, you may be, you might be familiar with these terms, but if you're thinking about this in terms of like credit cards and debit cards, it still kind of makes sense. So a debit decreases the amount. So if you have a debit card, it is attached to your bank. And so I actually stopped using my debit card almost 4 years ago. I used to use it all the time because I didn't have a credit card. But once I started using a credit card, I never use my debit card. I don't even go to the ATM. I rarely use cash. I really need it. So basically, if I want to get ice cream, I usually have leftover like Christmas money from like family members. And I just use that. That's the amount of cash that lasts me for like 6 months till my birthday. I get more money, and then that lasts me 6 months. I get like $100, and that's the $100 in cash I hold at any given point for the entire year. So I don't need my debit card. I don't need ATMs. But the debit card is attached, and then so it's like a credit card where you can do digital transactions at the grocery store and things like that, not have to pay cash or write checks. But it's different because it directly takes it out. So in a way, a debit card is an electronic check, but it's in a plastic credit card format, so you don't think of it as a check, and you don't have to fill out the routing number and all this other stuff. It's more instantaneous. But whenever we say debit, just think of a negative sign. You have $1,000, you go to the grocery store, spend $100, you have $900 left. Credit means that you're adding money. So when it comes to your account being credited, it means that money is being added to your account. So if you deposit a paycheck, that's a credit on your account. If you're paying a bill, that's a debit on your account. But if you're thinking about it from like, well, isn't a credit card like negative money? I have to pay that back. Yes, but the balance increases. So as you continue to spend more money, the amount of money that you have increases on the balance until you pay it down. So that's why it's called a credit card, because of the way in which we account the balance on it. Debit card, you're subtracting from what you have. Credit card, it's kind of like starting from nothing if you don't owe anything to owing positive amounts of money. But it also is when you're getting money from a bank and it's in there, it's counted as credit. So here's an example of a bank statement. So this number right here indicates how much money was in the bank account at the beginning of the statement period. So some statements are beginning of the month and it's the end of the month. Others are based on certain dates. So if you have like a bank statement or a credit card statement, and if you opened it up on like the 17th of the month, it might go through the 16th of the month, and it's not for 1 through 30 or 1 through 31. So you have to be careful and keep track of when the dates are on your specific statements. So total deposits is how much money the institution has put into this account. So they've deposited $8,705.28 into the account. They've taken away $99.26. There's some service charge for whatever reason. And so notice that the withdrawals were greater than the deposits, so it should make sense that the ending balance is less than the beginning balance. This has a list of all the deposits. So this is the list of all the deposits. Also notice how there is a interest. So they deposited this, they deposited this, they deposited this. Not 100% sure. I'm assuming that's like rent collection. So this is like actual money. I'm guessing these are rent collections that they're receiving from the departments. And then this is just interest because it's an interest-bearing account. Now, my guess is this service charge is because it's an interest-bearing account, but it's okay because their interest more than offsets the service charge, so it's still beneficial for them to collect the interest. If this service charge had been larger than the interest that they generated, it would probably be in their best interest to move to an account where they don't get that service charge. Oh, actually, the service charge is check printing. So I guess I was wrong. So I guess all about that insurance. So as you'll see on some of the homework assignments, most of the time when you order checks, you pay a one-time fee. You don't pay per check. But some institutions pay per check, and so this is probably just the accumulation of those fees throughout the month. This is the list of checks that they have written and the numbers that are attached with them. This is their rolling balance throughout the month. So deposits, outflows, inflows, outflows, outflows, inflows, outflows, inflows, outflows. So the daily balance should match the ending balance up here, and the differentials between adding this and subtracting this should be the same as that. But again, there could still be outstanding checks. Maybe they wrote a check for a new refrigerator. Maybe they wrote a new check for something else. Maybe they have an accounts receivable coming in for some other rent payment that they're owed. So this balance, even though this is the balance that's in their account on March 31st, is not necessarily indicative of the actual amount of money that is available to them. So what you want to do is when you're reconciling, you want to make sure that everything is accounted for. So your checkbook balance needs to account for all the fees and things like that. Some of them are probably in there, some of them are delayed. In fact, today I went to check my credit card statement, and there was a pending charge for something that I bought, and then there was a reversal of the pending charge for something that I bought. And so I had to contact customer service to be like, why is this the case? And was it because they were canceling my order? And the answer was they weren't canceling my order. It's just that they decided to do a price adjustment because the product went on sale. And so I was able to get some money back, which is cool, nice on their part. But the reality is what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that what's going on in reality matches up with what you've been keeping track of. So there's always something floating out in the abyss. You want to pull that in and look at it so you can have a good snapshot of what's going on right now. So here's a bunch of things that are going to be taken into account. EFTs or transfers of funds, interest, notes collected. So anything with a plus is a credit, anything with a minus is a debit. NSF means non-sufficient funds, online fees, automatic payments, overdraft, service charges, stop payments. Book errors could be in your favor or against. Anyone play Monopoly before? Bank errors in your favor are great. Bank errors not in your favor are not. So bank errors also over here. Outstanding checks that you owe are negative. Deposits that are on your way are positive. Direct deposits, positive, credit, and then other withdrawals. So these are all the things that you should take into consideration when you're reconciling your statement. So this is an example of the check register I was telling you about. So probably none of you do this, but you don't have to do this handwritten. You can do this in Excel. So in a way I do this, but it's usually in Excel. So I just update it every now and then when I know I made a big purchase. I'm like, okay, I need to update. Okay, I owe this on this card, owe this on that card. I have this much in this account, this much in this account. What's my net assets looking like right now? And when should I pay these things? And when should I time it so that way the flow of what money I'm getting is done in a way where I'm not like going broke or tight on money at any moment. So notice how this says that this is the beginning balance at the beginning of this page. So all of these are, so this would be like in the back of the checkbook. You'd be like, okay, my bank statement said I had this much, but I got this money, I paid this out, I paid this out, got this money, paid this out, got this money, paid this out, and then at the end, you keep a rolling total. So on March 1st, they had $12,912.24. They got a $2,000 deposit, or deposit $2,000 on March 4th. They've deposited another $224, so they add that, $14,912, $15,136. They paid $6,000 to Staples, so that drops them down to $9,100. Add $1020, or should we pay $1020 to Health Foods, down to $81.16. Got another deposit, $85.05. Paid $200, $83.05. Paid $200, $81.05. Paid to their advertising company. They're down to $5,905. So let's say that this came out on March 31st, and this check hadn't been deposited yet. Then the balance that would be on the bank statement would be $8,105.44. But you've already paid out that $2,200. It's eventually going to come out at some point. So this allows for you to know how much you have in the moment. But if you don't do this, you forget about that check, there's a risk that you might end up overspending, put yourself in trouble. So here's the steps to reconciling. And really, when you look at the homeworks, really step one is seeing how much money is listed in the bank statement, and then go through all of the extra numbers that are floating around in the problem, and then just add it. Identify if it's a debit, identify if it's a credit. If it's a credit, add it. If it's a debit, subtract it, and then you should have the answer at the end. But step one is to identify the checks. That's the hardest part. Step two is to identify deposits. So remember, these are debits that are outstanding. These are deposits in transit, so they're positive, so these are credits. Make sure that anything that's here or here is recorded. If it's not, account for that and make sure it's recorded in your registers or your Excel spreadsheet. Make sure there's no errors. So maybe you did some math wrong. So if we go back to here, maybe you put like 10,136. Well, make sure that the numbers are right, because then this is overstating it and you think you have $1,000 more than you really do. And then last step is to compare basically what's in your checkbook register, if you had one, with your bank statement after you've done all these steps. So take your bank statement value. That's the thing you start with, the bank statement value. And then from there, subtract, add, adjust for any sort of errors or little fees or anything else that might be interest payments, fees, overdrafts, etc. And then compare them. They should be balanced. If not, then check again. So here's an example of what a reconciliation can look like. Again, mine doesn't look exactly like this, but in a way it has similar. So this is what you have. This is what the bank has. And then it has, it knows that you have this deposit coming, but it isn't officially in there, but at least it's acknowledging it, so it knows how much money is in the account at a given point. So it's nice that you don't have to add that in again. So your checkbook balance is kind of where you started at the beginning of the month. So this is where you are at the end of the month. This is where you were at the beginning of the month. So like, remember, this is that number that was up here. And then what it wants you to do, instead of going like line by line and adding here, subtracting, adding, subtracting, adding, subtracting, organize them by addition and subtraction. So these are your credits, these are your debits. So you add in all your credits here. You get 1,800, you get 42 at 28, 56 and 720. Add that together, you have 6,812 to add. And so you add the 6,588 to the 6,812, you're at 13,400. And then you're like, oh, but I have these charges, subtract 2,850, subtract 104, subtract 722. So then you give away 854.50. And then, so you should expect it to be at 12,546. However, the bank isn't accounting for these checks that are outstanding that you've already taken into consideration in the checkbook balance. So you need to add these all together, 2,700, got to subtract it from this number, and then this is in balance with that, so you're good to go. So this is accounting for this, this is accounting for this, this is adding and subtracting any other things that may not be listed here, but are listed in the bank balance. So you might be asking, well, why do I have to add this in? Well, these aren't checks. These went directly into the bank, so you wouldn't have them on your ledger. So this is accounting for this and these, because these are checks and these are deposits that you already took into account. these are electronic transfers and little debits that are listed here, but not in your checkbook. So what you're doing is you're basically completing the information set. So you're adding all the check stuff to the bank balance, and you're adding all the bank stuff to the checkbook balance, and at the end they should be the same. So here's an example. Is this a debit or a credit? So let's go through these and don't look at the bottom, but just like for identification purposes, is check 959 a debit or a credit? So you can drop in the chat plus or minus. So minus if it's a debit, plus if it's a credit. So is 959 a debit or credit, plus or minus? Got a minus. Yeah, it's a debit. So anything that has check number implies that you're paying money out. So negative, 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 negative. Deposits are positive. So when you put this in your checkbook, you start here at 4,500, and then you subtract 143.50. You have a rolling balance. You subtract 66.10, rolling balance. Add 800. Subtract 451. Subtract 319.24 and add 400, and then this is your ending balance. So really for this, it's just making sure you know what's being subtracted and added. Let's see here. So if we look at the bank statement, things that we need to account for that weren't in the register. So if we go back to here, we notice that this $400 deposit does not appear here on the bank statement. So you need to add that $400 to the bank balance that you have at the end of the month. We also don't see check 960 $66. That's here. And we don't see 451.88 right here. So we need to subtract that from the bank balance. And notice how here we had 47.20.33, but because we didn't have this service charge, because it's not a check, in our checkbook, we need to deduct that from our checkbook balance. And now at the end of it, we have a matching number. So again, it's basically cross-referencing. Your bank statement, if it doesn't include a check or a deposit, you need to add and subtract those things for the bank side. If your checkbook ledger doesn't have any sort of fees or interest that is in the bank statement because it's not a check, you need to add and subtract those. And then once you do that, the number should match up. And that's the reconciliation process, to make sure it's basically a double checking mechanism to make sure that you have the numbers that you need. I'll leave this up in case you have any questions. Does anyone have any questions about this? Okay, so what we will do here